Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of ClueCon Weekly, sponsored by SignalWire. This week with us, we have the one and only Saúl Ibarra from 8x8, Chief Janitor at 8x8, and a few other titles, and very long friend of the open source voice over IP and RTC community. Thank you so much for joining us today. So,
Well, thank you, Luca, for having me. It's a pleasure. It is, I believe, my second ClueCon Weekly. Very excited to be here and chat about anything and everything.
we've been crossing each other's path for a long time now. We've met countless conferences, etc. And one of them actually is FOSDEM. So before we go there, Theo, would you like to give us the three people who don't know you a quick introduction about yourself? It's probably not
Uh,
necessary, but
I can do that. So my name is Saul. I'm coming at you from a sunny Amsterdam today, which is somewhat unusual. And I work at 8x8. Jokingly, I told you you can introduce me as the janitor in chief. I work on the Jitsi project. That is my one and only focus here at 8x8. And over the years, I focused mainly on the mobile applications and everything that goes around them. They are built with React Native, so there's a lot of overlap with the web. Um, because we need a WebRTC plugin, I also maintain our WebRTC plugin and end up sending patches upstream and what have you. But at the end of the day, I also end up solving problems in and around all of the projects that we co-maintain as a team. And a fellow jitster, that's what I do. Fix problems.
that's funny. Yeah. We'll come back to the React Native stuff later because that sparks some interesting considerations about
Hmm.
how mobile development is going. But first, again, we've crossed each other's path in both. I don't even know. It's been years, and
Yeah.
the main conference used to be FOSDEM, which I deeply love and hope comes back in person next year because I can't wait
Oh
to
yeah.
wake up in places I didn't know I was or whatever, and just walk to talk to random talks. It's just funny, and
Yeah, that's my
you've been
favorite as well. The random stuff that
yeah, it
happens
is.
there. I
I've
love
done.
it.
I've been in talks. I will not even have joined. I know you. Sometimes you're just looking for a place to sit down and maybe write up an email, and there's something interesting going on stage, so you just watch, right?
Yeah, it's crazy how the mind wanders, and you never know when it's gonna come useful. So
Yeah.
always
So
always interesting stuff.
at the latest FOSDEM, which was still in person, right? It was fully remote, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it's
You
been fully
and
remote for two
yeah,
years.
yeah. So I
Um,
hope it comes back. It's it
and
will come
well, I'm
back. I
pretty
mean,
sure it will. Yeah.
you can't keep people away from Brussels too long.
Yeah.
It's so fun.
Yes.
You and Emil Iva, the other founder of FrizzWitch, sorry, FrizzWitch, no, founder of FrizzWitch is a different person. Sorry,
Yeah.
Tony. The other founder of Jitsi, you had an interesting, actually, a keynote, right?
Yeah. So this year there was an interesting happenstance. Caught us by surprise, actually. Over the years, you probably remember we first had the open source telephony dev room,
Yeah.
where some nerds that were working with Asterisk, FreeSwitch, and the like gathered, and then there was another one called the Jabber dev room. And at one point, they both dwindled down semi simultaneously, and there was a lot of potential overlap because telephony stopped being only about voice, like it is more of a dated term these days, I suppose, and it's all about real-time communications. So a bunch of us gathered and we put in the application for the real-time communications developer room, and we've been running that for I think 5 years now. Now this year, I put in the application, and then I got nothing back. And then FOSDEM updated their website, and we were not on the list. And I was kind of baffled and like, how is it possible that just when RTC is most important, we don't have a venue where to tell our stories? uh, and well, turns out I was wrong. They had put up the website, but they hadn't finished updating it yet. But of course, people got wind of it, call for papers were already flying, and they had not finished updating. And what was missing, the critical part, was that real-time communications was becoming a main room. And from the FOSDEM perspective, a main room is a room that kind of tries to signify a broader interest or a more intense interest in a given topic than just a dev room. And talks are lengthier, um, and this was happening. And I was thinking, because it probably also happens to you when somebody asks you like, "Hey, would you like to present or something?" And or you're just thinking topics. When you're so close to the action, you just no longer
Yeah.
know what to talk about. You forget, what was I working last week? It was such a headache that I just don't want to think about it anymore. Um, and then I think I was taking a walk by the sea in my wife's hometown in Spain, and I thought, I think I know. Uh, like the Jitsi 20th anniversary is kind of coming up. It's sort of next year, but I thought
Yeah, might as well.
it's probably, I mean, it's probably fair to say that some research, some RFC reading, something happened the year prior, probably. Uh, and so I asked Emil, "Hey, would you like to do this dance with me? Let's talk about um, how the project came to be, what has happened, what we've learned." And we were bouncing a bunch of ideas, and we decided to focus on some concepts. And some of the ones we decided to focus on were maybe concepts that in my opinion, they don't get talked about as much. For example, one in the open source domain. And one such topic is, for example, funding or slash money.
Yeah.
It always starts as something almost adversarial, if you will. In the recent past, it has actually changed quite a bit. Like there's a lot of, your Patreons, your GitHub sponsors, LibrePay, of the sort. But in general, when you think about a large-ish corporation acquiring an open source project, sometimes they disappear, sometimes they change in weird ways. And I think Jitsi is one of the unique ones where not only has it survived not one, but two acquisitions, but it's stronger than it ever was after this journey. And, when you're on the inside, things look a bit different because things are also complicated. Suddenly you show up in a different place. You have to kind of prove yourself, maybe. It's not a super easy thing to do. You just suddenly you get money from somebody else, and business as usual. There are some complications, and the fact that everything is not only as good as it was but better uh, is just so fantastic. And so that was one of the things we decided to talk about. Also, things like the relationship with standards and
Yeah.
open source, right? These days, things are, different. It feels like uh, you could never have something like email invented today. But that doesn't necessarily need to be, a bad thing, I reckon. There's lots of standards that were over standardized and then nothing happened because of it. And these days, we have a solution that uses the standards, but for all intents and purposes, is pretty irrelevant. We use XMPP for signaling, but nobody cares because you
Yeah.
consume it via web API. So how does it matter if it's open or not, right? And you can still host it yourself because it's open source. So at the end of the day, you own the entire stack, and the protocol we use doesn't really matter.
Yeah,
So
that's
we
it.
went on about some of these topics, and
But going back to the standards, that, however, does stifle innovation to a degree, right? Because everybody is siloed away in their own area, and I know. So I think this also bleeds into the open source project money discussion. People, I feel like, and that's something I have no data on this, but it's just a feeling I have. Contributions to open source projects have gone down in the last
you think?
10-ish years. I feel like it. I couldn't. I'm
I
probably
don't
just not
know.
following the right ones because not being in JavaScript means I lost the growth of React and the.
I I'd say it's quite the opposite. If you look at for example, I was reading some article about the Linux kernel contributions, for instance. It is an open source project. Um, I think what we've seen is the big corporations getting involved, and some people like to take the cynical approach and think, oh, but they embrace, extend, extinguish,
Yeah.
yada yada, Microsoft's motto. But if you contribute that code under a license like Mint, Apache 2, well, whatever, an open source license, I'll take it. Whatever your motivations are, it's
Yeah.
free code, so I'll take it. To be honest, and if we've only seen that go up to a point where it feels to me like today, if you're launching some kind of service or almost anything that is developer oriented, that is not open source, I feel like you need to justify yourself rather than in the past where it's like, of course I'm not showing you my cards.
Oh yeah.
And then there is these rebels that do, but the default was not to share, and now I think the default it is to share, and the different business models formed around it, like doing support stuff, running it as a service, which is
Yeah.
also where we ended up. Like, it's not like we had a crystal ball and figure it all out. We tried a few things and we landed on a model that we think helps everybody, helps the project, helps our customers, helps our users, helps, and sometimes it takes some figuring out to do. But I think it has only gone up, at least from in the side of the open source lake or something where I'm at. That's what I can see.
Yeah, well, maybe it's just my main language is Ruby, so that is maybe lost a little bit of momentum. So that might be my feeling. Yeah. So, by the way, SignalWire is pretty much the same model with FreeSwitch, right? We have dedicated people working on it. Releases are actually getting better. They're closer. They are there's more bug fixes. It's there is one topic though which I really want to ask you flatly because it's happened a lot
All
with
right,
FreeSwitch. There are
hit
many
me.
large companies who use open source projects to make millions, and they are themselves billion-dollar companies, and they never contributed back a single line of code. Not to mention money, which you'll never see, but at least lines of code. I understand
Right.
there's not much you can do there, but that still feels wrong to me.
Well, it's a good question, and we both know a company that begins with an S that sells a product that is basically Jitsi with a different logo.
Yeah,
But when we started, well, I mean, of course, it's kind of hard to say, well, when I started, I thought, or whatever. I think that when Emilio started the project way back in 2003, it was what made sense to him at the time, right? It's a standards, it's open source, is like the rebel move where you do what the others don't do. And also the only way, like I've never worked writing proprietary software. So I've only ever written, there's always a few lines of code that you
yeah,
can't share because they belong with internal build systems or whatever the hell. But in general, the bulk of my work was always in the open, so I cannot really relate to the
yeah,
other side. Um, but they must, like, for example, one thing I see is that they are always behind. So by taking that attitude, you're always behind because you then need to wait until you can apply your customizations on top of what we do. And if you're not involved in the development, and we make it very easy. Not only everything is in the open, but we also host a bi-weekly call similar to this one, except that everybody else is welcome to listen in and ask questions and what have you. Um, to know about what's going on, what's coming. We now have, we've had contributions from large companies like Bloomberg that have sent us very nice patches. And right now we have this interesting situation where a colleague that left 8x8 is now working in a different place, still using Jitsi, and now they are contributing back like big chunks of stuff, like non-trivial features back to us. So I can only see the winning. And if some companies want to, profit off of it,
yeah.
we have not found ourselves in this position where someone like I think the trickiest position would be if you have something like Amazon selling your thing as a service. I think that has happened. I don't know in what similar. Was it with something like Redis or something like that? I think that's a much
Uh,
trickier position. Um,
yeah, there's other open source projects that have the problem.
yeah, or some. I forget. So I think that's a trickier position to be in. But I think when it comes to a real-time communications platform, um, yeah, we've
You
got the
just
track
take it.
record of, yeah, I mean, they can take it, but running it is non-trivial as well. So it's always like there is, uh, for example, all of the things that we've learned, not only throughout the years, but specifically in the last five, the last three, with the pandemic and everything, like that experience running the things at scale and all the fixes that came with it. So you can get the code, but you cannot get the experience. That is something that is hard to translate. It is there in the code, um, but I guess it's the way we do it, and we don't. I don't think anybody is mad at the fact that this has happened. We know many people are using our mobile SDKs to
Yeah.
power their own things, and it's fine. We let them do it. We would have, like, we make it easy to consume this, to plug it into your own system, because it's also important for us, right? For example, back to running things as a service and CPaaS stuff. As I said, that's kind of where we ended up. So we
Yeah.
now have this thing called Jazz or Jitsi
Likewise,
as a
yeah.
service, where we run this infrastructure in a very scalable way. And it's a two-way street, because you can look at it from, well, because it's open source, I can run it on my own Docker containers. We give you a full Docker setup to run it super easy. And then you may think, okay, my product is bootstrapped. So now I don't really want to worry about this part. I want to worry about my own product, right? Like, I think Emil said it best when he said that we build the second most important feature in your product. So if you're doing, doctor-patient consultations, you don't want to worry about the video. That should be a solved problem. You worry about the rest of the stuff. So maybe you start with a Docker setup, and then you're like, well, now I can give these people this money, and then they can run it. So I don't need to worry about
Yeah.
scalability, security, updates, all of that stuff. But then it's a two-way street, because if you choose a platform that has this open source foundation, you're also not vendor locked in. If we go out of business tomorrow, I hope we don't, you can still run the code. You can go back to that Docker thing if that's where you started, or just go to the Docker thing, or running on your own bare metal servers. You have that possibility. Um,
That's
and I
super
think
important.
that
Yeah.
is, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how many people are doing, it's impossible to count how many people did the transition back. But I think that what we see is that there's a lot of interest in taking that burden off. It's like, okay, so you can run it, and then I can focus on building my experience. That's great. And sort of that's why we focused a lot on making it more flexible. But all of this, it needs to be in the open source implementation so that it works as a service. Everybody that's using it wins.
Yeah. The idea of not having lock-in really helps sell the software as a service platform, if you will. Because at that point, you can really say, well, guys, if you don't like it, you can just pack up and run your own or whatever. But I think Emil's saying is perfect. Like, it's the second most important feature in your platform. It's anything you can buy and have other people run when you're bootstrapping is super important, unless of course it's core to your application, in which case I don't even know why if you're bootstrapping a Zoom clone, good luck.
Yeah, I think it's a tough one. Like, as I said, we didn't have the crystal ball. Like, we tried that. Um, we created like a pro version that I think is still out there, but we're no longer, heavily investing in marketing it out and everything, because I think that playing the cat and mouse game with the likes of Zoom is not. I mean, it's not like I am the boss here, but I personally also don't think it's a good use of our time. But
Yeah.
the platform thing, which was something that we have had in mind for many years, but then the planets aligned and we could build it. Sometimes it's just a matter of the perfect storm happening, and then we can do it.
Yeah, there's I mean, it's just a matter of how you market. Coming up with ideas is the hardest part, and implementation these days with all the open source
Yeah,
tools that you have, you can just do things. That's as an
for
aside,
sure.
since I do a lot of startup slash mentoring and talking with people, etc., as part of my role, and I feel like MVPs in startups, so the minimum viable product version of their own, are getting better and better because there's so much in the open source space. Then you can build on actual working applications. Like MVPs in the past used to be. So there's famous story about an MVP of a grocery shopping app, delivery app, one of the most popular. So I don't remember the name right now, where the owners literally set up a website, and when they got an order, they will go and buy the groceries for you and bring them to your house,
Okay.
because that's how they tested the idea. Like there was like these two guys in California,
Uh-huh.
and they go and buy the stuff for you and bring it to your house, and then validated the idea. Nowadays you can build everything, including video communications, just by using
Yeah.
either software as a service or so that's pretty good. So jumping topics, because that's super interesting to me. I am a very bad
Jump.
JavaScript developer. I keep being a very bad JavaScript developer, and I keep promising myself to learn some React, and I will do it eventually. But you mentioned you're using React Native on mobile. I'm very interested about
We are.
that. Like, it sounds like so many people are doing that. That is it actually taking over native?
It's a great question, and to be honest, I don't know if it's taking
Yeah.
over native or not. Um, so my story is that when I started tinkering with WebRTC stuff, so I also wasn't, and well, I guess today I have to call myself a JavaScript developer, even though, like, I'll be honest. I'll be honest. I used to think web development was not real development. I know. Bad me, bad me. I was young and I thought desktop software was the real stuff, or, server software. And web was, yeah, for the toys. And now, like, how the tables have turned. Uh, like, the web platform is just, it has everything. So it has, like, as loud as people want to hate on Electron, I'd rather have an Electron app that works on Linux than no app at all, which is what we were,
Totally,
and now
totally
we
agreed.
have. So anyway, the web being a very important platform, so that meant that when in the past I was working on a zip client, right, on a desktop zip client called Blink, and at one point, we thought we need to tap onto the WebRTC bandwagon, in the sense that we need to bring that endpoint, the browser, into the mix. And that meant that the only possible avenue was to start with WebRTC things, which happened on the web to begin with. And well, that meant JavaScript. So way back when, and it's funny you mentioned React. So as I said, I've never, especially front end, like I can do JavaScript things that are not in the front end, like that on the client side, running in the client, but not just next to the glass, because what I write sucks, style wise. However, when I started tinkering with React, it was for the first time I felt like I knew what I was doing. UI was like, it wouldn't look pretty, but the layout was somewhere there, right? Um, I felt like okay, this makes sense to me. And I like a lot the fact that it's not the huge thing you need to buy into, like, Angular, perhaps. I get both arguments. Like, you have, oh, it's everything for me, so it's less headaches. But I think maybe learning everything is hard, versus with React, you can take the view part only and then maybe work on your own state management, which is a simple global variable, and you can start with that, and then you
That's
learn
what
some
I do
more.
in React.
Yeah, and
I,
that works totally fine. You don't need to buy into the whole Redux super boilerplate thing. Now, when your app grows beyond a certain size, that's probably a better solution. So when I started this journey, I just took the simplest path that I saw because I'm like, well, I don't know. I learn it. I learned the next step later. I like this one solves my problem now, and that has, at least for me, has proven to be successful in the React ecosystem. And you can complicate things as you move along. So when we had this web thing working, then we wanted it to run on mobile. And at the time, React wasn't the thing. So I started with Cordova and ended up maintaining the Cordova iOS RTC plugin.
For
So
you,
that gave me some,
I've used that. Thank you.
yeah. Now Thierry, and so all thanks go to him now. But I was a maintainer for a few years, and then when joining Jitsi, React Native was a thing, and we were doing React Native things. So I've played with both, and I think React Native is a better platform. The thing is, what I think is a bit of a lie is that this promise that you don't really need to dive into the native stuff
I was
anymore.
about to
I
ask.
think, yeah, no, that's so I maybe it's that it all falls on me. I don't know, but I am the one that it does all the glues with the both native APIs. So because you want to talk to a proximity sensor when you're in a when you're in a call and you use the earpiece, well, you want to make sure that the ear does not trigger the LCD, so you need to write some code for that. That's native.
Hmm.
Um, and more importantly, you want the whole WebRTC shebang to work. Like that's a lot of native code for then calling it from JavaScript, but still a lot of native code. But what we accomplish in our particular project is the fact that the web and the mobile are one code base, and not like in a it's a monorepo
Hmm.
kind of style. But because the both UIs are written with React, then what you end up having is like a shared core business logic. And then on the leaves, let's say, you then output React Native views or just DOM. But in the middle, everything is all of the same. And I think we have between 80 90% shared code, I would say, in the business logic of both worlds. And that definitely allows you to kind of grow features faster on both platforms rather than imagine you had like a native iOS, a native Android, and then a web. I know some have done something like a shared core library thing that
Yeah.
does most of everything, but then I'm not sure how they tackle the fact that, for example, rendering is completely different. Um, Painting video on the surface is just completely different across platforms.
Yeah.
So I think you will always end up needing to go to the platform. And I think React Native it's very well positioned for this. The other contender that recently joined the flock is Flutter,
Hmm.
but well, I am not betting on it.
Hmm.
A because it is from Google, so they have a
They might
tendency
just
to
abandon it tomorrow because yeah, we didn't like
they
it. Sorry, guys.
they have a tendency they have done that in the past. React Native, it's actually now, Microsoft is a heavy user and contributor of that. Like
Oh,
they even added one of the sections in the Windows 11 settings panel is written with React Native Windows.
oh wow, really?
So what that kind of tells me is like, well, if Facebook would abandon ship, then I'm pretty sure Microsoft would pick it up. And it's very community, there's a lot of input from the community. So I think as a project, it's a healthy one. But then also it's using JavaScript, which I think is very important because Flutter uses Dart, which means you need to reinvent the universe.
Oh
There's
yeah, I've
less.
seen that. I've taken a look and actually didn't try doing anything in Flutter because I had to learn a language. I already don't know JavaScript very well. Having to relearn something else. I mean, I can.
Yeah, but not only learning, but I think tapping on the existing ecosystem. I think it's a taller order. I think, or at least, so they both have different pros and cons. And if you are starting a project from scratch, and depending what your targets are, one or the other may make more sense. But if you already have a web project that you're adding a mobile side to it, then it's
No point.
probably simpler to go with the technologies that are closer to the ones you're using already, and then you can probably reuse a lot of stuff, which
What's
is
the
the way.
what is the overlap?
Sorry.
You mentioned there's an 80 to 90% overlap between the web
Mhm.
and the mobile code base. What's the
Yeah,
overlap between iOS and Android code bases?
99%.
So
And
aside
the
from
one,
little things, aside from those little native things you mentioned, like turning off the
yeah,
screen when you're talking, and which is
yeah,
probably
yeah.
super
Each of
documented stuff.
them. No, it's so. For example, the audio device management is a separate thing on each of them. The integration with the native calling stuff on iOS, you have CallKit. On Android, you have connection service. So completely different. But when it comes to the logic that's most used, well, maybe 95 is an exaggeration, maybe it's 97, because it's those things. I mean, of course, the entirety of WebRTC, because one half is written in Java and the other half in Objective C, but the interface that this presents to you in JavaScript is
Yeah, you
one.
didn't even
So
know.
from the perspective of once you've solved that the cross-platform disparity once, then the code you write, the React Native code you write, is just JavaScript, and in almost all instances, it's the same. Sometimes you have to do tricky. I mean, the one that comes to mind is the there is a thing in React Native to avoid the keyboard from covering a view. Like, like in a chat where you type at the bottom, and when the keyboard comes, you don't want to cover the input, otherwise, where are you going to type? So there's this thing called a keyboard avoiding view, and sometimes the platforms have subtle differences. So on Android and on iOS, it will inject either padding or vertical space to avoid covering that thing. So sometimes you need to do those kind of tricks, but it's, I would say, uncommon. For the most part, you work on things that work on both platforms. Like, you want to do navigation, well, then present me a screen that covers the screen. Do like stack navigation, and those work cross-platform just fine because abstractions have been created, and at that point you don't even care about it.
Yeah, there's I mean, as someone who's so I do a little bit of R&D. I do a lot of solutions architecture for the customers, etc. I feel like it's probably time for me and my team to start picking up some React and React Native and trying the mobile stuff, because it's our SDK is actually in React Native, so there's mm,
Oh, very nice.
there's something there too. Yeah, where you might have contributed some patches to the WebRTC component we're using, because there's really only one, right? And
Oh,
it's
if you're using ours, then yes, we just made a new release today.
no, I'll take a look then. Good. So yeah, jokes aside, I think you're right. And what I like about React is that it's taken on a life of its own that's separate from JavaScript. Frameworks that went out for a year or two usually stay attached to the language. React obviously works in JavaScript. It's written in JavaScript, but it's being a React developer is almost a kind of its own job at this point. You have
Yeah,
to know JavaScript, but it's separate. So it's going
yeah,
to
it's a
stay for
different
a
skill
while.
set, I think. Yeah, I think I know what you mean. I mean, I say this as someone who, even though I write JavaScript, I definitely am not a front end developer. I cannot center a div to save my life.
Thank people for
But
Bootstrap and Tailwind.
yeah, so React like doesn't give you that, but you have a lot of like UI toolkit things to help you with that, and using native components in your so they look more native. Like very recently, for example, part of the work that we did in the Jitsi Meet app was to replace these custom dialogues that we have come up with native ones. So, on Android, you will get like a nice flat thing with all caps buttons, and on iOS, it will look like it should on iOS with the bolded default action, red if it's distractive. They are not all caps and whatnot, and all of that is taken care of at some lower layer, because at the end of the day, people do like the familiarity. And I think very recently, even Google I read that Google said they would abandon ship, and that they would start slowly but gradually writing their iOS applications with native UI instead of material all the things.
Yeah.
I get both arguments, don't get me wrong, because if you are a Gmail user, I guess using the same app in different devices the exact same way has certain value. At the same time, if you're using like an Android style app on iOS, it makes that app stand out. It's like out of place, right?
Oh
And
yeah.
maybe it
Yeah, I think
creates this
Gmail
overhead as well.
Gmail is probably simultaneous with a very good example and not a super good example of that kind of work, because honestly, it's so distinctive and has so many users. Then they're probably almost the only ones who could claim we keep using our own UI elements because people just know those. That's probably fair. I mean, I wouldn't argue against that. Almost anybody else should use native.
Yeah, I think it's fair. But if I don't know, I guess that if you give an iPhone to a very non-tech savvy user, right, and you load it with apps, and you have these ones from Google that behave different than the rest, then maybe they can notice this. Not you and I, or not people that have been exposed to Gmail, but I'm thinking lots of people are getting to use computing devices, like mobile being their first.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe elderly people that have not used computers before, and now they get a phone or a tablet to talk to their relatives
And
because
now they have
fucking
to use
COVID got everybody at home.
their computer and their
Yeah.
new phone, and that app looks different.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, so on all the apps, when I have a list of things, if I swipe this way, I get these options. Or if I long press, why doesn't it work on this one?
Oh yeah,
So
you don't
that,
learn, you don't really learn. Well, I mean, we're used to UIs and stuff, but normal users, yeah, you don't really learn why things work that way. You just know
yeah,
that if you swipe right, it's gonna do this,
things
and
happen. Yeah, exactly. So I
when it
think bringing
doesn't,
that familiarity, then it's a good thing
yeah,
for the platform.
good. Well, thank you so much. So we had so much to talk about. We could go on for hours, and we
Oh
probably
man,
will at some other point. So
we're already almost 45 minutes in.
yeah. So the
Well,
was great seeing you. It's been a while. I hope I meet you in person. I don't know if you plan to travel to the US or some conferences in Europe
I
next.
I'm not sure. I don't have anything lined up just yet. I'm not sure if Dan is gonna do ComCom this year.
Mm.
If he
Gonna be
does, maybe I'll
virtual,
try
likely.
to. Not sure. At least everything here is open in the
Yeah,
Netherlands and
here
Spain as
too. Yeah, I
well.
think.
But yeah, who
I don't know.
knows if.
Maybe I. Well, come see us at ClueCon in October.
So are you guys doing it for reals this time?
Yep. That's well, last year's was hybrid too. We had
Ah,
200-ish
hybrid.
people in attendance plus the virtual
Oh,
stuff. Yeah.
okay.
I feel like the
That's nice.
hybrid model is here to stay because we had a
How
lot of
did that
people
work?
well, just very just so
Feedback wise, I mean,
the
what's the
main
feedback you received? Like good?
so the main feedback is that many people who will not have come to the conference in person for various reasons, I don't know, travel, like they hadn't even come before, like no people who had never come to ClueCon did did buy a ticket and watch the talks. We did some interactive remote activities too, so we had ways
Mhm.
for people to interact from home, not just watch talks, because you can do that on YouTube, right?
Yeah.
But the had some interactivity, and in the end ended up bringing in a lot of people who will not otherwise have attended, and I feel there's value in that. I've seen many
Oh,
conferences
absolutely.
do less engaging remote appearances, like you can buy a ticket for $50 and you can just watch talks, no interaction
Yeah.
whatsoever. And I'll do that because honestly, I will not have gone to that conference probably. I will not have listened to those talks because maybe I only care about one talk, right? And then you just, why not? It's cheap.
Yeah.
And
I mean, at the end of the day, I at this point I no longer go to conferences to watch the talks, but rather for the interactions themselves. But I do understand, because you're right that, and it also depends a lot of on your where your life is at, right? So, for example, I am the lucky father of two right now, and traveling to Chicago is great, but it's also very hard on my wife,
Yeah,
and because logistics. So, maybe you gotta let that one go, and you can do virtual, which I think is a great solution for that. Now, as I said, the me personally, the interactions is the one thing that I enjoy the most. So I'm hoping we can do some in the near future, and hope to meet you at one of them.
for sure. Well, or worst case, we'll meet each other in FOSDEM next year. That's oh, that's
Yeah,
I'm
that's close. That's close.
yeah. So
That's the one I never miss.
yeah, no way I'm gonna miss FOSDEM. Although this time around, if I'm speaking at one of the dev rooms, I'd like to not have the first slot on the second day. Because first slot on the second day at 9 a.m., people just don't show up.
It's
They're
yeah,
hungover.
it's rough. It's rough.
At
It's
one
a rough
point, it
one.
was probably me, Matt Jordan, who was moderating the room, and
Oh,
two guys from India who had sat down in that room because they needed to sit down to prepare their own talks for another room a few for an hour later. So it was me,
oh,
him, and two people who
yeah.
weren't not interested. Yeah,
when when preparing a schedule, I usually do some kind of either physical or virtual die roll to say, well, who's going to go. But it's hard to balance that. Probably you have also participated in ClueCon org staff, and like there is certain slots that are super bad, and you
yeah,
need to balance. Like I'm not gonna put the first time speaker on the top spot because then they're gonna get scared away. So I
yeah.
remember one
The
year
last
I took
slot,
one of
last day
the
too is terrible.
yeah. So like one of the first times, like I got the one of the bad ones. I like, well, whatever. I've been around the block enough times that it doesn't really matter all that much. And we organize it in such a way that we tried to give every project the ability to show off or tell others what they've been busy with, what's new, and that was the best because at the end of the day, you can always watch the videos later if people are interested. And I think in the end, it's good practice for the speakers as well. So
Yeah, I mean it's always great. Well, thanks again for joining us today.
thanks for having me.
Saúl Ibarra from
Pleasure.
8x8, janitor in chief, or rather problem solver. And I hope I see you soon. And for the rest of the people, I'll see you all next week. Goodbye.